I can change the world with my own two hands, make a better place.
I was not going to miss my opportunity to have my own walk-up music, right? I wanted to be a baseball player my entire life, and I'm jealous every time they get to pick their own music to come up to bat. And so I forced every one of our keynote speakers to actually do the hardest thing possible, was actually find one piece of music that reflected on their personality. All right, so thanks to all the speakers so far. I think it's going exactly how we expected, but I wanted to explore a little bit more of this intertwined history of Moore's Law and the role of government investment, specifically DARPA. But the other thing I'm going to do, right, is an open love letter to Gordon Moore, right? Just unabashedly just say, this man that I've never met, and to be honest, we've never even been in the same meeting, but I've grown to have so much respect for his writings and the guidance that he has provided. I literally was a skeptic when I was like, you know, Moore's Law is overstated. He had a simple observation, right? And then everything happened after he made that observation, and how come he's getting all of the credit? And then I looked deeper and deeper, and the more insightful that he actually became. And I'm going to try to convince you that his words he spoke on the basics of what he gets credit for were insightful, but actually the moment we're living in right now is where he has true prescience. So he changed the world. He made a simple observation, which by now everybody here probably knows, but it's worth repeating. Right? He basically said, in very colloquial language, right, we're going to cram more components into integrated circuits, and that in very plain language said cramming is the future. We're at least going to cram until, right, yield gets in our way. But that curve, the bathtub curve, is going to move as a function of time. And he described this one-way trade space. It doesn't really exist in engineering in almost any other field. Smaller is better. Smaller is lower cost, as he shows through this graph, but smaller actually is lower power. You'll get more functionality, and we'll actually be able to use them faster. And that is actually an amazing observation, but also an incredible stroke of luck that you can find an engineering vector that is a one-way trade space. And it mattered, right? So this isn't Moore's Law. This actually gets shown as Moore's Law quite often, but it's not. It's the implication of Moore's Law. And I like to show this to people in another field and say, you know, we've had some progress. And then they say, well, we've had progress too. Every field has marched along with time. And then you point out that y-axis is a logarithmic, right? It's a log scale. It's a 53-year exponential. 53-year exponentials aren't supposed to exist, right? And he even says, when he found out about ERI, he wrote and said, thank you for what you're doing. I never saw this actually, right? He predicted all of 65,000 transistors in 1975. Like, that was what the paper actually culminated in, and he said, you know, that's as far as we can predict, and after that, all bets are off. And so it would have been crazy for him to predict a 53-year exponential, because 53-year exponentials aren't supposed to exist in this world. Now, one reason I think it does exist, and how he missed it, but better people than me have also predicted the demise over that 53-year cycle, is every time you march your way up this curve, you actually get better computing resources. Computing resources allow you to get better design tools to be able to both design the transistors and harness the complexity. And that is the definition of a feedback, right, where each node exists, right, on top of the prior work, and an exponential is born. And our country created that exponential and harnessed that exponential better than any other country in the world, and it's had broad impact. So we call this Moore's Law, and it's really from the simple observation. I don't like calling it Moore's Law, even though I think that name is stuck. We're not going to try to change it, because a law, right, is something that's going to happen whether we like it or not, right? You have to get in its way. You don't have to promote a law, right? It sort of sounds like it's mundane that from this observation that we were able to this achievement. The other thing that he wrote in response to when we kicked off, is it's a testimony to the people, right, that have knocked down these obstacles to make an observation into a law that makes this law the foundation of society that we have today, that is actually part of public lexicon, that people know what Moore's Law is, and it's not just because of Moore, it's because of the community. As described, it's Robert Kahn quitting his job at MIT to join the government to not only TCP/IP, but create the Strategic Computing Initiative. It's Lynn Conway making the right decisions to create Moses, to break apart an industry, to show that a fabless design industry can exist. It's Ivan Sutherland and Mead writing together in the 70s, reminding us it's all about wires, right? And allowing us to focus on the right aspect of the system. And it's Dan Radek investing in Berkeley to create the FinFET. From an observation to a law, it takes the right decisions and it takes the community, right, to execute flawlessly. The government, academia, and industry tripod that this law is built on, right, is the prototype that all other research fields should aspire to. Right? So calling it a law belies the fact that the number of right decisions and sacrifices people have made along the way are what's key to actually existing as long as it has. And it matters. And it matters in a big way. And if you look from the national economics impact, GDP growth over a 2-decade period that we chose here was 85%. From the semiconductor field, it was 265%. Right? That matters in the everyday lives of people across this country. It's the third largest export that we have as a natural good that we create, right? And export to the rest of the world, third only to the automotive and aircraft sectors. And it's the single most high-tech field, right? And what I mean by high-tech field, more research goes on. For every dollar that is created, more money goes back into the research community to stay ahead than any other field, including things like pharmaceuticals. This has mattered, right? Harnessing an exponential, a 50-year exponential that really shouldn't have existed in the world, has been good for our country in ways that we really are just starting to appreciate. And of course, it has huge national security impact as well. If you look at any one of our systems that are the basis of our national security apparatus, you will find an incredibly intertwined network of heterogeneous electronic systems. Right, this is an early warning system. Right? This allows us to know what's happening before everybody else knows what's happening. It senses the world, it processes that information, it disseminates that information to the people who need it, right, before the rest of the world will know. This is what keeps us safe at night, and at the core of these types of systems, not just this, but any system, right, is the processing and the culmination, right, of that 53-year exponential. But this is where the love letter starts. Everybody knows about Moore's Law's observation on page 2. In page 3, he got even wise. He gave us clues to where we're at today. He said, these are the boundary conditions in which you should continue this race. Right? You're going to cram, you're going to get more and more components, you're going to use them up until the economics start cause you problems. He says the particular cost of a system function must be minimized. It's an economic argument that he laid as the boundary conditions for when Moore's Law will need something different. It doesn't mean the end of the road, I would say. We don't think Moore's Law is stopping at all. It's going to go through something different, and we all will experience that over the next 10 to 20 years. We go back one. Okay. All right, so what we were showing is we're at that moment. We're at a point in time where the fab, the design, the verification, the test and evaluation, and writing the software on top of a system on chip is more expensive than ever. If it's an economic argument that he laid out as the boundary conditions we should start continue to scale, right, it's an economic pain that we're starting to feel. And actually talking to industry leaders throughout yesterday, you could actually see how each company is starting to see this personified inside of their choices that they're having to make. So he predicted cost, but I know he didn't predict the world we're living in right now in its entirety. It's not as simple as just saying they're more expensive, we need to do something different. On top of abstraction, abstraction that has pushed the value chain up from the core of the semiconductor development, right, into the software stack, closer to the application. It is no secret that in venture capital today, right, they are hunting, right, for big return on investment. That has translated to focusing at the software level, and I don't blame them. Their job is to make money, and that's where money is being harvested. But the byproduct is, right, you aren't able to get funding for some of the core underlying underpinnings of the hardcore semiconductor problems. Computer science departments are exploding across our department, our country, while electrical engineering departments are relatively flat. It's just an indication of the time that we live in. So abstraction means we're pushing the value elsewhere. A good opportunity for the government to step in, right, to make sure some of the basics are tended to. Of course, other countries see that same opportunity. Foreign investments are an all-time high. You'll hear about $150 billion from China. Right? That is a number that is staggering and never actually been seen before in the history of the world. That much of a concentration in one technical field to poach the people who are in this auditorium, right, and try to move the epicenter of electronics eastward, right, is a challenge we've never faced before. Right? But it's not actually just the state-driven investments. Right? You actually have a lot of foreign investment, or even private investment, right, that's having that same effect in trying to push the epicenter of the electronics industry elsewhere. Now, of course, we're at a very unique time from a manufacturing perspective. We, as we sit right now, do not have access to the most advanced transistor node for the first time in the history of the transistor. When I say we, the DoD cannot manufacture at 14 nanometers based on policy. It's the first time since Bell Labs invented the transistor to where we sit today that we have not had that luxury of modernizing to the most advanced capability. Right? The industry-government relationship, which is the core of the electronics field and the development of the transistor, has broken, right? And we need to bind that back together. It's one reason we are all here. And at the bottom here, this is very important, it's rising stakes, right? It matters more than ever the choices that we make at the foundation of the stack. It is irresponsible for us to go chase performance only. Moore's law set us on a performance path. Right? We need to make sure that we're making the decisions, right, that put security first. Security has to be first with performance following. Right? You cannot build a digital influence society at the level that we have where the foundation has cracks. You can't build cities on concrete that if you played the wrong music note, it would shatter. Right? You cannot do that in the electronics domain. And so we need to invent, right? At the exact same time, we need to care about security at a level that we haven't in the past. So this is our unique moment in time. This is the legacy that we've been handed. This is our community, right, staring at challenges, right, that are very complex and multifold. So we go back, right, to the master and say, what should we be doing at this moment in time? He was really focused on cost, but his guidance actually applies across the stack. He says, right, it may prove more economical to build large systems out of smaller functions which are separately packaged and interconnected. So let's look at what that would look like. You take a component-crammed monolithic system and you split it apart. And that's the CHIPS program. That started about 2 years ago, about a year and a half ago, right? And we're working with Intel and some of the major players across this country to build an ecosystem where I don't have to design the entire monolithic system. I can do 10%, or 1% of a design and add that into an ecosystem that can make the overall system better. Now, this is a better way to do things specifically for niche players, specifically for the DoD. Right? It lowers the barrier to entry to do a new design where you don't have to recreate every IP block at the most modern node. I can do a unique accelerator design, enter it into the mixture without having to bite off the entire complexity of the design. So that's better, but it's not an exponential on its own. But if you take a step back, you say, what does this mean? It means I can get back in the materials and processing game. I don't have to beat silicon. There's trillions of dollars investment in silicon. I don't have to invent a material that's better than silicon. I can complement silicon. Each one of these blocks, right, can be done with unique processing steps, with unique materials. I can go vertical, right? And that's the 3D SOC program we're kicking off today. Carbon nanotubes, maybe they're the right answer, maybe they're not. ReRAM, maybe they're the right answer, maybe it's not. But we're demonstrating it from a 90 nanometer manufacturing base, a manufacturing base we have in many locations, including within the DoD. I can, by exploiting that vertical dimension, do better than a 7 nanometer design. Not for every algorithm. When proximity and locality matter more than raw processing speed, then that interlacing of materials, memory, and processing together means those algorithms can be done incredibly efficiently, even if the transistors aren't quite as good, right, as if you did it in a monolithic block on its own. Stanford, MIT are working together. They're working with a small company in Minnesota, Skywater, to show what niche manufacturing can do to leapfrog some of the capabilities at 7 and 5 nanometers. You also then can look at alternatives to processing. This is work on the Frank program. The Frank, we're looking at novel materials and how can we use the eccentricities of these materials to be a part of the processing. Can I make an accelerator where I have non-volatile logic, right, or non-volatile memory, or can I combine those things together with such efficient switching in my memory that logic and memory are actually sort of blended together? I don't have to replicate across the entire monolithic chip. I can actually just do it for one of these building blocks. All right, so we set us on a pathway that we're chasing to figure out how do you get new materials to the mix. New materials being developed across this country is a pathway that starts to smell like a new exponential. But we still have design barriers and complexity barriers. He said, perhaps newly devised design automation procedures could translate from logic diagram to technical realization without any special engineering. So in 1965, he's sitting there in a lab looking at 50 transistors. And he's projecting that we're going to get to 65,000 transistors. And now we're at billions of transistors. And he described, right, what we need to do today in terms of what actually Dr. Hennessy just reminded. We can do better in EDA. So what does that look like? We kicked off the CRAFT program. The CRAFT program represents a circuit design in software. Lines of code have been demonstrated that from a line of code, I can create generators that then, with minimal human interaction, create a physical device. Berkeley, with partners, Cadence, have demonstrated, right, that their design teams of small teams of 2 to 3 graduate students can create, I would say, medium-scale systems on chip infinitely faster, and that I can now create variants of this chip, and I can look at my data and my application and tweak those variables, right, and create a new system, right, with orders of magnitude lower effort. Okay, so that's step one. That's doing things faster, and we're on that pathway, right? But that's not an exponential on its own. Faster doesn't get you an exponential. You can do 100x better, right, once, and you're still going to be run over, right, by the expectations of Moore's law. So we started a program called IDEA. And IDEA is intelligent EDA. And this is a pathway to actual exponential. everybody in this room can be empowered to do a tape out, right? And I can capture that information, capture that design information, and if I have intelligent EDA, right, that learns from that data, then the next time we go do a design, you will be better off. Then you add that into the data mixture, and then the next time someone else does a design, they will be better off, and that is the basis of an exponential. We don't have that capability. We don't have EDA that learns from design, right? But IDEA is trying, right, to figure out what that would look like. Right? Again, you can't just do better. The legacy we've been handed is a 53-year exponential. You have to find new exponentials if we're going to society moving. Last but not least, we want to have the ethos of software. Sharing results so that you're not starting from scratch. You will not be able to capture an exponential unless you're standing on the shoulders of each other. Right? That is the basis of the feedback loop that will allow us to propel ourselves forward. We have to share. Well, why don't we share? And it's not because we're greedy and we just have a culture of proprietary development. It's because we don't trust the results unless we have intimate knowledge of how it was developed. We need a revolution in verification. Verification needs to allow us to pull something off of an open source repository and use it with full faithfulness that it's actually going to operate the way that it's supposed to. So that, I don't actually care if it's open source or not. I need to be able to design a system where I am not guessing. I'm not guessing how this is going to operate in my system, and we need a verification revolution to get there. And last but not least, we're exploring architectures. Similar to what Dr. Hennessy described, we kicked off a series of programs to look at levels of specialization. Gordon Moore, this one you got to squint a little bit more than in the other versions, but he did say, amortize the engineering over several identical items or evolve flexible techniques for the engineering of large functions. How do we reuse functional blocks in different ways inside of a circuit design? And we started with Hive. Hive looked at collecting many DoD applications and looking at the data. And the data, it turns out, is oftentimes sparse. And we have GPUs that are very good for dense processing, but where it's sparse, we didn't have a good solution. So Intel and Qualcomm are doing the base level designs, working with our universities and federal lab partners on the software hardware co-design so we can traverse a trillion edge graph, even though each of the nodes are sparsely populated. So that was step one. We started architecture exploration into this level of specialization, but it turns out life is messy. It's not easy to characterize these data sets or sparse and or dense, right? They're complicated mixtures like this graph looks like. So we kicked off a program called software-defined hardware. Now the chip has the intelligence to know what it needs to be for the data that's flowing through it at that moment. We don't know how to do this, right? We're just starting this program, right? But what we're exploring is data introspection capabilities, the software level, reconfiguration in millisecond to microsecond timescales at the chip level so that you're near optimal, independent of what the actual structure of that graph looks like. So for data analytics, we've got two programs, sparse and dense systems that will ease the use of how these chips will be used. And lastly, we looked at domain-specific SoCs. How do you write DSLs? How do you reinvent the way that we're going to use accelerators close to the sensors, where we have massive amounts of data streaming through the systems? How do you have domain-specific languages and representations of both the hardware all the way through the software so that it's easily reprogrammable, yet you enjoy the benefits of the specialization of those accelerators? So that's the three-legged approach towards the architecture wing. But wait, there's more. 3 pages, every single sentence actually means something, right? Which the brevity here, right, is striking. Even the cartoon matters. He's got a cartoon. In 1965, handy home computers. He's describing PCs, right, that are going to be sold in malls next to a cosmetic store. Right? This is 20 years, right, before the PC revolution in the 80s and the 90s. And what he did there is a gift describing the driving applications, inventing, right, without an end state, right, is like pushing a rope. Right? You need a pull. Right? The PC pulled for a while. Right? Now we've got mobile that's pulling. We don't know what's pulling next. We'll try to get into that on the next set of slides. But at the last line in this paper, right, literally made me drop my pencil. He's describing the successful realization of such items as phased array antennas, for example, using a multiplicity of integrated microwave power sources could completely revolutionize radar. Radar, comms, all the electromagnetic spectrum is being disrupted right now by the use of silicon, right, for millimeter wave arrays. In 1965, he's predicting the 5G battles that we're fighting right now in terms of where the millimeter wave space is going to apply. All right, so we thought it'd be instructive, right, to follow this cue and to show you some of what we think are the driving applications, a poke into the future. One great thing about working at DARPA is you get to see the future as it emerges, and we want to share some of those driving applications with you later tomorrow. We're going to start with N0. This is work pushing the absolute power limit to 0. How do I create systems which are intelligent and actually functioning, but are in that 10 nanowatt class, right? 2 to 3 order of magnitude lower than where we're existing today. This is a 10 nanowatt neural net engine that University of Michigan has created. We use them for unattended sensors, so they'll operate now for years as opposed for days or weeks. But it'll also be the heart of IoT as we move forward. Trillions of devices, right, will not exist in the world if it means trillions of batteries to change. Right? So going that next revolution towards zero power operation, so you're either energy harvesting and or operating for batteries for years, right, is that next step, and we've proven that it's possible. Tomorrow, you'll be able to see the Shield chip on display for one of its very first times. This is exploring the art of the small. 24 million chips on a 12-inch wafer. Right? Less than a penny per. So what are you going to do in that tiny space? The answer is a lot. Hundreds of thousands of transistors at your disposal. AES-256 encryption, X-ray sensors, light sensors, right? The things that we need to actually know where this tiny chip has been, right? And to provide authenticity. We have a real problem of authenticity in this world. Right? We need a physical tag, right, that can be applied to events in the physical world that can label and stamp digital information. This could be a part of that solution, both from an anti-counterfeit perspective, but it's actually just scratching the surface of the overall meaning of having something that you really trust in the physical domain. We'll describe Reimagine. Reimagine is a generation camera program. Everybody in the world is doing machine learning. They're learning on the data that the camera sends them. Right? We're not doing that. That's one where we get to let go and the rest of the world take over. We're asking a more foundational question. How do you ask the camera to give you the right information? How do you create that machine learning way up through the sensor so the sensor has saliency? I am not looking at every one of you, right, at any one moment. Right? My brain has cognition. It tells my eyes where to focus. Today, our sensors just feed information in a one-way flow. This will be the first time we explore how both RF systems and EOIR systems or camera systems can have that built-in saliency. L2M. This is a program we kicked off when we realized there's nothing we can do in terms of efficient deep neural nets, right, that isn't being done throughout the world. We're going to stop asking how to make efficient deep neural nets. We're asking the question, what can't deep neural nets do? Right? One thing they can't do is respond to surprise. They can't flag and say, you should not trust me right now. The data that I was trained for is no longer valid. And we need to have that ability so we can trust our systems. And one way to do that is to have evolving networks, systems that are actually learning in the field, right, that can respond when conditions change, so you don't have to just rely on your training data, right, to know whether it's going to be applicable for your current situation. We're also running SC2, Spectrum Collaboration Challenge. This is building such intelligence at the edge within our sensor systems and our radio systems that they know how to collaborate. This is a grand challenge that DARPA is running, right, where we're challenging the software-defined radio community and the machine learning community to figure out how would you impart edge intelligence that says, without the FCC, without a spectrum manager, how would you all get along? Every one of our systems is going to get intelligence, right? Either machine learning or otherwise, intelligent code that allows it to make decisions. Each system is going to get smarter. Each self-driving car is going to get smarter. Each robot's going to get smarter. What we don't know how is an ensemble of independently trained systems are going to interact with each other. Spectrum Collaboration Challenge asks that at the microsecond scale. How are you going to figure out how to deconflict when you have a shared resource like the spectrum, right, without the human making that decision for you? And last but not least, SIF. I alluded to this. This is incredibly important for the initiative. We view hardware as part of the foundational solution for security. It is irresponsible for this community to run off and only focus on performance. There are things we can do at the hardware level that restrict the state space so that the software designers don't make the mistakes, right, that have everybody in fear right now. Right? Our government is more worried about cyber than we are about pushing forward with next generation electronics. And that's the right response right now, because we don't have proof that we haven't made mistakes. We need to have the foundation secure, right, so we have a chance of getting the software right. And we need that foundation to help the software stack in building in security. So Moore's Law has taken us an incredible way. We have a legacy that is daunting. Finding a next generation exponential is a DARPA hard thing. It may be too hard, right? But we will never have a better opportunity than we have right now. Congressional support, the PCAST advice, great leadership up and down our chain has empowered people in this community to have the opportunity to take the legacy that we've been handed and create a new legacy. We sit what I call Moore's inflection. The page 2 to page 3 flip, right, is something that we need to harness and master, just like we did, right, the description on page 2. We have the right people. We have an opportunity because the world's best and brightest minds still come to this country. We can tap into those best and brightest minds to lead us to a better place. So I couldn't be more excited to be able to kick this off, and so thank you so much.